You are here for Towards 2026, Shaping Your Future in Volunteer Engagement. Hello and welcome. If you don't know me, my name is Court, and I work here at Get Connected by Galaxy Digital in creative communications and outreach. So I get the joy of bringing together groups of volunteer engagement professionals here in the Zoom webinar space so that we can talk about what's most important for volunteer leaders. And if you're not familiar with us, Get Connected is our best-in-class volunteer management software. And our software serves more than 60,000 organizations, including more than 400 volunteer centers and millions of volunteers. And our family of technology products really focuses specifically on volunteer engagement and meeting the needs of volunteer leaders and all of the programmings and volunteers that you are managing, running each and every day. And so that's one of the reasons why we're here and why we really care about topics that are very important to volunteer engagement professionals, because that's who we are working with every day. So we're incredibly excited to welcome Faiza Venzant, CVA and Executive Director of the Council for Certification in Volunteer Administration, as our special guest speaker today. Faiza is a volunteer herself from a very young age, and she's been an advocate for volunteer engagement and leaders of volunteers for the past 20 years, speaking and facilitating and continually learning from others internationally. Faiza is a passionate volunteer and a passionate person about equity and access amongst volunteers and leaders of volunteers. And she believes very strongly that a community with a thriving volunteer base improves the overall quality of life and health of all of its members. So we're excited to have Faiza with us today. We'll also have my teammate, Annalise Ferry, managing our chat box today. Annalise, like myself, also comes from a background in nonprofits, and she works with us here on the creative communications and outreach team, spending her time creating resources that are specific for volunteer leaders to use in their everyday practice. So thanks, Annalise, and she'll be keeping up with your questions to help pitch those over to Faiza. And so, what are we going to cover today with Faiza? We're going to understand the significance and opportunities of the UN's International Year of the Volunteer 2026. Very cool declaration that came out on December 5th. We're going to learn how to integrate AI into volunteer engagement in a way that is ethical and maintains human connectivity. We're going to discuss emerging trends in professional development and upskilling and discover how peers are adapting their skills for the future. And we'll also get a chance where I'll get to share with you a little bit about Get Connected by Galaxy Digital's technology audit that helps to assess and elevate organizations' volunteer infrastructure with helpful tech tools. All right. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and hand it over to Faiza and just say, Faiza, number one, super excited to have you here today, as always. And as a leader at the CCBA and as a volunteer leader, tell us a little bit about why these particular topics that we're going to be discussing today are so important from your perspective when it comes to, volunteer engagement professionals all over the world.
Thank you so much for having me, Court and Annalise, and the whole team at Galaxy Digital. And thanks to everyone who's here today and who showed up and who's taking a little bit of time out for themselves. I'm really proud of all of you for taking a minute for your own volunteer engagement practice and being here. What we're going to be talking about today in terms of thinking ahead to 2026 is really important because for me in my career in volunteer engagement, moving forward with intention and really having a plan, thinking about taking time to reflect on what's happened this year, and then really having a plan and being intentional about how we move into 2026. I think is a way we strengthen our own volunteer engagement practice, and then a way that we uplift and strengthen each other in as a profession, as volunteer engagement professionals together. So thank you again so much for having me here. If you're watching the replay, I just want to also say hello. And before we dive into sort of goals for today, I really want to say a huge thank you to Court and to Annalise as well. Thank you for providing these free webinars every month. They're so thoughtfully curated. They really shine a light on the volunteer engagement expertise in our profession. So if you have been to a Galaxy Digital webinar in the past, use the chat box or the Zoom reaction button to show some love. And if you haven't yet, please check out some of the past webinars from this year, like Ali Zool, who did a great webinar on engaging youth volunteers, Severina Ware, who did a really cool webinar on volunteer recognition as well. These monthly webinars are really excellent, and I'm looking forward to many more in 2025. And I encourage you to make sure that you're signing up for future webinars and also looking back at what you may have missed. 2025 has been a really pivotal goal, a really pivotal year globally. Where I live in Southern California in the United States, what comes to mind for me when I reflect back on 2025, first and foremost, are the wildfires in Los Angeles earlier this year. I became a US citizen this year. I'm also thinking about the constantly changing federal priorities and how that really rocked the charitable sector in the United States. And I'm also thinking about my first year as a tackle football mom and how much I realized I didn't know about the sporting world. I got to have a really cool conversation with Court about it actually earlier this year. And it really made me understand how coachable I am and how much more I still have to learn, um, and how hungry I am for knowledge in all areas of my life. I'm also on day 17 of Elf on the Shelf. In our house, we do Snoop on the Stoop. I truly feel like 17 days so far is a huge accomplishment. So each of us has an individual experience informed by personal events this past year, national events, and global events. So we're each coming to today with different areas of expertise and different feelings about the year that we've all just been through together. I'd really like to get us started by asking you to think about a question. So, for yourself as a volunteer engagement professional, I want you to really think about what is an achievement in your practice from 2025 that you are most proud of. All right. I want you to take a moment to reflect on that. And I'm going to invite you to share these moments through a tool called Menti. If you're using Menti for the first time, what I'm going to ask you to do is in another window on your computer or on like a smart device, go to menti.com, menti.com, and you're going to pop in the code 8773 5759. Okay. And the question for each of us, and I invite you to share, as a volunteer engagement professional, what achievement from 2025 are you most proud of? So share that achievement. We want to see what you're proud of. I want to see what you're proud of. I'll share an achievement of mine as well. I'm really proud of a tool that I created with a group of CVAs called the Is Everyone Welcome Toolkit. I'll pop that onto the screen. And you'll see that as you begin to use Menti, you will see everybody's responses populate onto the screen. So take a minute to acknowledge and to see your own reflection on the screen. And take a minute as well to look at what others are proud of. And it's a chance for us to really celebrate each other. Oh, I love this. I love what I'm seeing here. An increase in our an increase in our drop-in volunteer program. I'll read a few of what I'm seeing here. Learning to delegate and empower volunteers to step into a place of greater leadership themselves. Amazing. Updating our volunteer orientation training video. Oh, I see one here. Getting my CVA. Congratulations. Oops, I just switched the slide here to using my touch screen. Congratulations to whoever that is. Continuing an AmeriCorps program despite uncertainties around grant funding. So if you're not familiar with AmeriCorps, if you're joining us maybe outside of the United States, AmeriCorps is a federally funded program and has been for years and years and years. And this year, there have been so many uncertainties around it. So yeah, I'm feeling that. Someone wrote, I set a record in volunteer retention. Oh, another person said, we grew one of our events to the biggest it's ever been. So thank you for sharing your wins. I want to say congratulations to all of you. Today is about focusing on ourselves and specifically on ourselves and in our work, and in our volunteer engagement identities. Okay. As we look towards 2026, we're not just preparing for another year, okay? Collectively, we're shaping the future of volunteer engagement together. And this is a conversation that we need to continue to have together over and over and over. And I'm glad we can do a little bit of that here today. I think sometimes when we think about setting goals and setting intentions, they can be really individualized. And I encourage you to do that, of course. But what I really want us to think about today is what are some of the intentions that we can set together as a community of practice as volunteer engagement professionals? My hope is that in taking time to acknowledge that today, we can really move into 2026 with some intention for our careers. We always have the opportunity to think about global connectedness in our daily work. But this coming year, we're going to see that possibility a little bit more with the United Nations declaration of the International Year of Volunteers in Sustainable Development. And we're going to explore that a little bit as well. And then lastly, I hope that we can be open to new learning and to new challenges, and what is next for our profession. So really thinking about ourselves as a community and thinking about what we can do collectively as a profession um, in moving forward. And it looks like my camera stopped sharing. So hold on one second. Let me just see what happened there. All right, there we go. I think I'm back on. All right. Hey, everyone. Um, so that's what I'm hoping that we can talk about for today, and I hope that's why you came today as well. So let's get started. So one of the things that I wanted to start off talking about today when we're thinking about intentionality and moving forward in 2026 is the United Nations International Year of Volunteers for Sustainable Development. I want to back up a little bit to understand how we got here. So in 1985, the United Nations first called on governments around the world to observe International Volunteer Day. And a lot of us celebrate and acknowledge this on December the 5th every year. When it was first declared or decreed, it was really about raising the awareness of volunteers' contributions to economic and social development in each country. And this was only about 40 years ago. So we've been celebrating the International Volunteer Day on December 5th annually since then. That was 1985, so 40 years ago. Then in 2001, the UN General Assembly proclaimed 2001 as the International Year of Volunteers. There were three main goals at that time, and the first was to increase the recognition of volunteer contributions. Next was to facilitate communication and networking between volunteers, and there were some really cool events that were happening at that time. And lastly, it was to promote volunteerism and volunteer contributions globally. I was in my second year as a volunteer engagement practitioner back then, and I remember in Canada, the Royal Canadian Mint made this a special dime for the International Year of Volunteers, and a lot of organizations ordered these dimes or got them as a commemorative object, and were giving them to volunteers as recognition. So that was kind of cool in 2001. Then in 2011, there was the International Year of the Volunteer Plus 10. It was known as IYV Plus 10. I don't know if anyone remembers that or was practicing at that time. I was, and I'll be honest, it really didn't land for me. There was a lot of performative things that took place, but it really failed to connect volunteerism to real, tangible global change. And now in 2026, with what is called the International Year of Volunteers for Sustainable Development, we have a real opportunity. And I'm not really here to comment on United Nations policy, but what I do appreciate and what I hope we can all see as an opportunity is a real strategic effort to connect the efforts of volunteers to the Sustainable Development Goals, or what is also known as SDGs. And just in case you're not familiar with SDGs, back in 2015, all 193 member countries of the United Nations agreed upon what are called the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals. Now, these Sustainable Development Goals are going to sound really familiar to many of us because this is what we do all day long in our professional lives. So the SDGs, they focus on things like ending poverty, improving education and health, protecting the climate, making sure that there is decent work that's created, and reducing inequities and inequality. So you and I know, through the work that we do every day, that these aren't abstract ideas, right? We know that they shape how we can live in our own communities safely, how we can afford basic needs, and so can our neighbors and our community members, and how we can all have real opportunities. So the Sustainable Development Goals, they're important. They highlight that our global problems are connected, right? So things like climate change, a global pandemic, which we all recently experienced together, conflicts, right? Conflicts in another part of the world are not contained anymore. They affect us globally and everywhere that we are. What happens in one country affects others. It's whether it's through migration or supply chains or environmental impacts. What we do in our own local community has an effect on others globally. And so, even though we may all be experiencing our day to day a little bit differently, we're all interconnected. And I know we know that more than ever this year. Um, these sustainable development goals are also really important because they hold governments accountable and governmental institutions to act and to have more conversations so that we're not just being performative, we're actually moving towards measurable actions. They also link us, right? They also link us to each other, whether that's through the climate, through the economy, through policy as well. And they're about making sure that all of us on this earth are here and that there's long-term stability for all of us. So the bottom line is that they matter because they are a practical plan to build a more fair society, a more stable world for all of us. And that is what we do every day as leaders of volunteers when we invite community members and volunteers to help us in fulfilling our missions. So, what I love about the UN's International Year of Volunteers for Sustainable Development is that they have linked volunteerism to that. And they are clearly saying what we all know, right? Volunteerism is a vehicle by which we achieve this global stability, where we achieve these sustainable development goals. So the opportunity that we have, especially in this coming year, as the UN rolls out different initiatives, and as some of the partners of the UN, which I'll get to next, talk about a call to action, is to really link what volunteers in our organization, what our community, and what our organizations are doing, link that and relate them to the Sustainable Development Goals, especially in the year of 2026 and beyond. These Sustainable Development Goals, they truly validate the work that we do. They connect us to government funding and priorities. They encourage us to see our work within the systems that we operate in. And they challenge us to measure impact in ways that are more than just feel-good stories, right? Or metrics. They really challenge us to link those metrics and those data to real measurable impacts through those sustainable development goals. So if you're not familiar with the sustainable development goals, we've shared a link for you, or we'll share a link for you. And this is one way that we can start to talk about the impact of volunteers if we're not already doing so. I know that there are some organizations out there that are doing a fabulous job of linking volunteer contributions to the SDGs. But if you aren't doing it yet, I really encourage you to start thinking about the work that you do within your community and start elevating it and thinking about it and in this more globally connected way. So look at those sustainable development goals. If others in your organization are talking about them in other ways, think about how you can talk about them as well. All right. I want to move on to talk about what does that mean, right? So what does it matter? This year is upon us, in under 2 weeks. What does that mean? So the International Association for Voluntary Effort, which is also known as IAVE, in preparation for 2026, IAVE engaged in some really, really deep work. They surveyed over 14,000 individuals that work in volunteer engagement from over 164 countries to really think about what are some action areas that we can be engaged in so that we can make sure we are building a future of volunteering that is sustainable. And they came up with these 3 action areas based on those responses. And another thing that they came up with was an amazing statistic that globally 862 million people are volunteering each month. And our efforts and what we do as leaders of volunteers are included in that. And when we are talking about the International Year of Volunteers for Sustainable Development, I hope that each of us feels a sense of connectedness to that number, that 862 million people volunteer each month. I take a lot of comfort in that because I know that sometimes our work can feel really isolating. We can feel like the only people in our job that are doing what we do. We can feel as though nobody understands what we do. And I'm kind of here to say that that's not true. And we are part of this collective effort of these 862 million people who volunteer each month and who we know personally. So, Ayave's call to action for the future of volunteerism is really global recognition of volunteerism for sustainable development. And it matters because it's an opportunity for us to elevate our profession and what we do and to align with these global goals, these SDGs that we've talked about. So, this is really our chance to move from um, what is in here under the recognition piece, which I think is actually speaks to these call to actions in general. So the call to action is in three separate action areas: recognition, support, and safeguarding. And when we look at each of them, one of the things that stands out to me, it's categorized under recognition, um, but I think it encompasses everything that we're going to be talking about here, and that is that volunteers must be systematically valued and not just symbolically appreciated. Okay. And we talk about that a little bit more. Ayave talks about that a little bit more when they talk about recognition. And what they're saying here is that, volunteers are strategic assets. They're not just helpers. And I want us to really think about when we talk about and when we market volunteer opportunities, when we talk about volunteer contributions, whether it's in our newsletters, in our social media content, at recognition events. Are we talking about volunteers? Or are we talking about them as strategic assets, right? Think about how you talk about volunteers, and think about how you connect that to your community's well-being as well. Okay. Um, Ayave also talks about support as an action area, and they talk about how volunteering just doesn't happen automatically. We know that. We all know that, right? We know that it needs infrastructure and it needs investment, right? And it also needs inclusive opportunities that make sure that everyone is welcome in the call to volunteer and participate in moving communities forward in ways that they've decided, especially those who are from marginalized areas. We know, and what they talk about in the third action area is safeguarding. We know that volunteering only thrives, and as is written here, when people are safe, supported, and protected. And what does that mean for us? It means that we recognize that there has to be more volunteer safety into laws and into policy. And I think we're going to see in 2026 a little bit more of a push for that from the UN, but also from local governments. And I want you to think about the influence that you have locally, whether it is with your city council, with your school board, provincially or statewide, whatever that looks like. What is the influence that you have, and how can you influence laws and policy when it comes to volunteer safety? You want to make sure that your organization and the community that you support are insured against harm as well. And you also want to make sure that you are upholding good codes of conduct, not just for volunteers, but for everyone that is engaged in making sure that your community is safe, um, and um, and that your community begins to thrive. Okay, so Ayave's call to the action for the future of volunteering in these three action areas is really important, and we're going to see a lot of initiatives and a lot of calls to give input into in 2026 into these three action areas. Now, what happens in 2026 does not stop there. It's going to inform 2027, 2028, and years forward. It's really important that each of us, when we hear about these calls to action, when there are opportunities for us to participate and to lend our voices, that we are taking those opportunities to do that, because we have a say and we have unique knowledge in these three action areas specifically. So I want to challenge each of us here when it comes to each of these action areas So, for example, when it comes to recognition, the idea is that volunteers must be systematically valued and not just symbolically recognized. So, pop on over to Menti again. Again, we're going to go to menti.com and we're going to use the code 8773 5759. That's in the chat and it's on the screen. When it comes to recognition as a call to action, right? The idea is that volunteers must be systematically valued, not just symbolically recognized. I want to know from all of you who are out there doing this work every day, how are you doing this or how can you do this, right? How can you make sure that volunteers are systematically valued and not just symbolically recognized? So I see something on the screen around birthday cards. Great. So that's acknowledging volunteers symbolically, like through a birthday card. I want us to think a little bit further than that. I want us to think beyond events. I want us to think beyond certificates and dinners and trophies and awards. I want us to think about how do we systematically value volunteers? What does that mean to you? And some amazing strategic answers coming up on the screen right now. So let me take a minute to read some of those. Ensuring all staff are trained on how to interact with volunteers and the role of volunteers in an organization. Yes, that is one way you can systematically value volunteers. Embedding staff training um, and an understanding and creating this culture of how to work with volunteers, how to partner with volunteers, and what their role is in the organization. That is how you systematically value volunteers and create that culture within our organization. Okay. Empowering volunteers to take part in mutual aid work in their communities. You might want to use words like educating volunteers on how to, or providing resources for how volunteers can take part in mutual aid work in their communities. Making sure volunteers are part of the strategic plan for the organization. Absolutely. If volunteers are part of the success of how your strategic plan is going to be operationalized, then they also need to be part of how this plan is developed, right? Making sure, and there's a couple folks here that have said things like letting them know the impact, consistent updates on impact. Yes, a way that you systematically value volunteers is by letting them know the impact of what they do beyond just a thank you or an award, a ribbon or a trophy, is actually connecting them to the mission and the impact of the organization. I love that I'm seeing more in here around involving volunteers on strategic planning. I love some of these more individualized things like thanking them personally every time I see them, talking to them and doing check-ins, really making sure that your recognition is individualized and personalized, written notes, phone calls, advocating for them in staff meetings, excellent. These are all great. I see one here that says a volunteer leadership committee that meets monthly and provides input on the volunteer programming or onboarding, etc. I think this is a really great way to make sure that volunteer voice is included. Systematically valued again in how you are going to recognize volunteers. Involving volunteers in decisions, building a meaningful recognition program by incorporating appreciation from different motivations, asking volunteers what they appreciate. I think I did a session on that with Galaxy Digital as well. So if you want to learn a little bit more about incorporating different types of recognition, look back in the webinar library and you'll find some of those as well that are there. All right, Court, just before, I haven't been able to look at the chat at the same time, but just before I jump to the next call to action, anything in the chat that I should be aware of?
Yeah, we have folks that definitely want to be able to see these later, so we'll definitely follow up with everyone. And also, it sounds like other folks are doing like kind of maybe some large summits that strategically involve volunteers.
Oh, I love that. Love
So
that.
that's pretty cool. It sounds like maybe some statewide organizations are doing that and involving volunteers. Um, so yeah, some very cool initiatives coming, and volunteers will be recognized in these as well as having a chance to be a part of breakout sessions and planning.
I think that is it's such an easy lift. If you're an organization that already does training, whether it's for staff or community members, and it's appropriate to invite volunteers, I think that is an easy win and a wonderful way to systematically value volunteers. I used to work at the YMCA of Greater Toronto, and one of the things they used to do was a volunteer conference every year. So volunteers were used to staff always heading off and going to different places for conferences. And before I got there, my predecessor was like, we should have a volunteer conference. And volunteers could attend this conference and get their CPR certifications, especially those who needed it to volunteer. They could get their annual recertification. There was wellness training. There was all kinds of different trainings and workshops and keynote speakers. And it was an amazing way to recognize volunteers, to involve them in our stories of impact, and to have them, be able to go to a conference for a day. And, they even asked for certificates at the end of the day. Like, I want to show people that I went to this conference. And it was such an easy lift for us. We had the space, we had the expertise, we were running these sessions all the time anyways. So we just did them on a Saturday and had volunteers come. So think about some of the things that are already going on in your organization and how can you involve volunteers in that. All right, when it comes to that second call to action around support, the headline sort of there from Ayave is volunteering needs infrastructure and support. So how are you doing this, or how can you do this? So as a reminder, what they're talking about here is that volunteering doesn't just happen, right? So what are the things that a volunteer needs to step into or to be able to come into to feel supported and to make sure that their experience is a meaningful one, that their time is well used, and that they feel as though they are included and they belong in all of their identities when they come in to volunteer. So how are you doing this? How can you do this? How can you make sure that volunteering has infrastructure and support so that when volunteers choose to volunteer in your organization, that they feel that. So excellent. There's somebody that has written about having clear guidelines. Yeah, volunteers shouldn't have to guess. They should know what to expect. They should have clear guidelines. Someone had said productive onboarding. I love the use of productive in front of onboarding as well. Yes. Make sure that it's simple and clear. Training. Collecting feedback as well, right? So you're not just pushing information out, you're also getting some feedback around how are we doing? And thinking about collecting feedback, that's feedback that you can take action on as well. We have here, someone says a very specific example. All volunteers have a supervisor outside of the volunteer services office specific to the location that they are partnered with. Excellent. They know who they can go to, right? So what is the infrastructure and the support? How are you doing this, or how can you do this? So strong procedures in place so that volunteers know what to do and who to contact. Clear communication throughout the full volunteer life cycle. I love whoever wrote that. I love that you see communication as something that is constantly happening, that needs to happen throughout the life cycle, and it's not the same communication just at specific points, right? We have here tools and systems supported by policies and procedures, clear roles, updated handbooks that can serve as a guide. We're going to talk a little bit about AI a little bit later on. And a challenge that I have for all of you is look at some of the communication tools that you have, and I invite you, use AI to make them friendly for different audiences, right? So feed it into AI and sort of say, make this make sense for someone who's between the ages of 16 and 18, or make this make sense for someone who's between the ages of 45 and 50. You know the demographics of the volunteers that you partner with. But you can also be more inclusive in having different versions of the different tools you have available for volunteers. And we'll talk a little bit more about that as well. Someone has a specific example here. Weekly survey, since we have people serve food 7 nights a week at our homeless shelter. Yeah, so getting feedback and asking volunteers for that. Thank you all for sharing that. And as Court mentioned earlier, all of these slides, especially the ones with the Mentimeter where you're seeing each other's suggestions, are going to be available to you after the webinar today. So if you want to go back and look at what other folks are doing, that may, inspire something in you or just confirm something that you're doing, I encourage you to take a look at that and go back. So the last call to action from IAVE, where we're going to start to see requests for our input, requests to jump into initiatives that are there, is around safeguarding, right? And so when we say safeguarding, we say that volunteering thrives when people are safe, supported, and protected. How are you doing this, and how can you do this? Okay. So again, think about some of the things that you're currently doing or what you can be doing moving forward. We've got something around clear policies around harassment, weapons, grievances, code of conduct, clear policies. I really like the suggestion here, having leaders available for all questions and conflicts. I think that transparency and the accessibility to leadership is really important in terms of making sure that people feel safe. Um, there's this idea around consistent check-ins, asking the volunteer, how can I better support you? I love this question. What can I be doing differently? How can I better support you? I ask my kids this all the time. Am I doing a good job as a mom? What could I be doing differently? Um, Give me my report card. And my kids, when I say it to them in that way, they'll say something like, it's always funny stuff that they say, but it's little hints for me around what I could be doing differently, right? Like, Mom, you're so loud when you wake us up. Okay, I can do that a bit more gently. Um, you know, so just always asking, and always showing that you're open to self-reflection and bettering yourself as well. Sometimes we can, I think in the spirit of wanting good feedback, we can put the onus on the volunteer. What do you need? Instead of saying like, what can I do to make it easier for you? Asking them to tell us what we can be doing differently. Um, I Let me take a little bit more of a look here. Risk management, getting feedback on policies and procedures, having a process for volunteer conflict. Excellent. A lot around here around clear reporting and escalation pathways. Bullying and harassment reporting as well. So, what I like about all of these suggestions is that there has been some thought around, we know these things are going to happen. We know there's going to be conflict. We know there's going to be bullying. We know there's going to be harassment. It happens when you have people of all different experiences working together. But we're going to be proactive and have some kind of a process or procedure or something in place so we're not being reactive in the moment. Thank you to whoever said incorporating tools from the Is Everyone Welcome toolkit, the equity toolkit. Appreciate that. Yes, the Is Everyone Welcome toolkit is a great place to start as well. And someone else here wrote the opportunity to reply anonymously if someone is more comfortable being honest that way. Thank you for reminding us of that as well. So, when we're thinking about safeguarding, I want us to think about moving forward, what are the things that we're currently doing? Are there things that we're currently doing that it's time to evaluate them to see, are they still working for us? And how can we do that moving forward? Right. I'm going to take a quick look in the chat really quickly just before I move on to the next thing. All right. So I want to wrap up this piece around IAVE and the International Year of Volunteers in Sustainable Development and 2026 moving forward by saying that I hope that you are starting to think about volunteerism. What can we be doing locally to contribute to these efforts globally? And as you start to see these invitations to participate in this dialogue that is going to be happening in 2026, these opportunities to contribute, to give feedback, to share what we've been doing today. We're going to have calls for us to share. What are you doing? What's working for you? Please toot your own horn, share when you're asked. It really takes all of us to elevate our profession and to elevate the importance of volunteerism and connect it to the Sustainable Development Goals. All right. So the next thing that I want to talk about is artificial intelligence and how we use artificial intelligence in volunteer engagement. And I know that people have a lot of different feelings around AI. It has clear, undisputable environmental implications. It can negatively affect mental health. There's a lot that we can say is wrong with it, but there's also a lot of benefits as we get to know it. And so using only one word and acknowledging some feelings that are around there, out there about AI. What is using only one word in Menti, how do you feel about using AI in your volunteer engagement practice? So we're starting to see some of the words that are coming up. We've got optimistic, relieved, we've got nope, curious, scared, cautious, love, invasive, uncertain, helpful, conflicted, hesitant, mindful. Great. So as you are popping in your words, overwhelmed, yeah, I'm going to say um, I am feeling optimistic. I'm feeling curious. I'm feeling intentional. Um, and at times I feel overwhelmed, like I'm maybe not moving fast enough. Maybe my curiosity is not moving me fast enough. Someone wrote irritated, grateful, adverse, cautious, liability, climate, bad for the environment. So, yes, we have to acknowledge, right, that someone says eerie, bad, all of these things are all valid. Yep. Wonderful. I'm going to give a couple more seconds for people to talk about it and say what they're feeling. Okay. And I want to remind us that AI is still really new. Um, it doesn't know us, it doesn't know everything that we know. And we're all still figuring it out. Okay. I personally choose to be intentional about how I use AI versus canceling it versus boycotting it. It can't make me do anything that I don't want to do, and I choose how I use it. Okay. And that is something that I'm really intentional about and something that I really think about. So I'm not going to AI for quick things, that I might want to Google, or I'm not trying to replace Google with AI, which I know a lot of people are doing, because in the back of my mind, I am thinking about the environmental repercussions of it. But I am going to AI to be really intentional when it comes to my volunteer engagement practice. I have a resource that I want to share with you. It's called Brevity and Wit, and it's called The Conscious Guide to AI. We're going to drop the link into the chat. And this is one of the best guides that I've seen out there on AI. And if you're somebody that is in the nope category, if you're somebody that's in the excited category, the curious category, I think it's for anybody. This is a really great guide into understanding what AI is, what it's not, and how to use it with intention. And how do you use AI with intention in your work? Brevity and Wit in that guide, one of the things that you'll see are 4 core commitments when you're using artificial intelligence. And I'm not going to go into like what is artificial intelligence. I'm going to assume that we all have a little bit of knowledge around it. If you are somebody that is still really, really new to artificial intelligence and AI, I'm going to encourage you to look at this guide. It's so comprehensive and it really helps you to think about how you can use it consciously and how you can use it with intention, and how you can use it in a way that it can be helpful to you in your work and in the mission of the work of your organization, and your work in partnering with volunteers. So Brevity and Wit have 4 core commitments when using AI. They are consent, transparency, intention, and participation. So I'm going to start with let me start with intention. So when it comes to intention, which is the word that I kind of keep front and center when I'm thinking about AI, you have to decide how you use AI. It can't tell you to do anything and it can't force you to do anything. Um, you let AI know what it is that you need, and you can take or leave whatever the response or whatever the outcome is. Okay. So nobody is forcing you to do anything. And it doesn't do anything for you other than what you ask. And you can choose whether you use that information or not, right? So remember that when you're thinking about using AI, that intention for me, for you, it might be different, but for me, the intention is the most important thing. After that is transparency. So when I use AI, so for example, I like to use AI um, when it comes to being more concise. I can be really wordy. I can phrase things in a way that can be too academic at times, or I use way too many words. And so often I will take a thought, I'll put it into Copilot, which I use, or ChatGPT if I'm on my phone, and I'll say something like, can you help me to make this sound a little bit more concise? Or can you help me to say this in a way that I can make my children understand what I'm saying? Say it in a way that a 10-year-old can understand. And I'm transparent, right? I'll say to my kids, yeah, I use ChatGPT to help me figure this out. I'll give you an example in a second, okay? Be honest and clear when you're using AI, so everybody that is benefiting from the work that you do knows that. So I've seen a lot of organizations say things like, this is our virtual assistant. This is an AI chatbot, and they're transparent. And so a person that's interacting with that knows there isn't a human on the end of this line. This is a chatbot. Be honest about that, right? Be transparent about that. I see a lot of reflection papers when people renew their certification, right? I can tell people are using AI and I don't fault them for that. I can tell that they're using it just to make themselves sound better because we're not used to in our profession writing a lot. But what I appreciate is when somebody puts at the end of their paper, I used AI to help me make my thoughts more concise. I appreciate that transparency that's out there. I know that the tool is out there. I know that folks are going to use it. That transparency is really important to know that as well. The other thing around a core commitment that Brevity and Wit talks about is consent, right? Before you use anybody else's information or stories and you plug that into Copilot or ChatGPT, please make sure you are getting consent from that individual, okay? So if you are asking ChatGPT or Claude or whatever it is that you're using to help you tell a volunteer's story, in a more funny way, or make it sound a little lighter, or condense it into 250 words, and you're going to use AI to do that, please, please, please make sure that you have consent from individuals before you are popping their stories into ChatGPT. Please make sure that you are removing identifying information before you do that as well. I think for a lot of folks who are experimenting with and who are using AI, I have a board member at CCVA that I want to do a profile on for a nomination for an award. So I said, hey, can I take this information that you've given me and use it in AI to, fit the word count for the nomination form? And I want them to know that I'm going to use AI to do that, and I want to have their consent. And they're like, yeah, I use it all the time. So that consent and that transparency is really important. And then lastly, participation. Your participation is coupled with your intention, right? You don't have to sit back and take whatever your AI, whichever model is that you're using, spits out at you, right? And it's not necessarily going to be correct. AI is not correct all the time. And we've seen lots of examples of where it can be incorrect. So you don't have to just sit back and take what is sent to you. You can share your thoughts. You can give feedback to a chatbot like, no, that wasn't good, or no, you missed this. You can feed back information to make the tool work a little bit better for you. You don't have to just take what you are given. You can help and shape how that AI is used as well. Now, within what your volunteers might do or perform on behalf of your organization, you also want to make sure, for example, if volunteers are creating content, or doing anything in their role that requires AI, you want to also make sure that there are some group rules, that there's some conversations that are happening around consent, transparency, intention, and participation as volunteers are using these things as well. So the tool from Brevity and Wit, their Conscious AI Guide, is out there. I wanted to share some places where I have seen AI used in volunteer engagement lately. And used really well. There's some great chatbots that are out there for FAQs for prospective volunteers. I have seen folks use AI for drafting reference letters or support letters. I've used AI myself for drafting support letters for organizations. Again, I put some information in, I get some information out, and then I take that and I work with that, right? It saves me a lot of time in formatting and putting my thoughts in order, but I don't just take what I'm given. There's a participation back and forth, and I edit what's given. One of the things I mentioned before, suggestions on how you can vary communication materials or training materials by your audience. Someone one thing that's really powerful is, can you help me to change this message, for example, as a prompt so that it's suitable for an audience where English is a second language, for example, can be really helpful. You can use AI for translation. And again, make sure you're checking the work. It's not always right. Suggestions for content creation, draft reports and analysis, those kinds of things as well. I want to give you an example of uh, how I explained to my children how to use AI. So my son is using Google Slides and has to do presentations, and the class is experimenting with AI. And so he was like, Mom, what is this? How do I use it? Like the teacher told us that we have to talk to our parents about it. So I asked AI, or I asked Copilot, can you help me to explain using AI to my kids? Use football as a reference because that's what they're really into. And here's what it came up with, okay? So it says, when you think about intention, imagine you're the team captain. You choose the plays that match your team's style. And instead of just running whatever, and you use those instead of just running whatever the playbook says by default, okay? That's the intention, right? You choose the plays that match your team style instead of just running whatever the playbook says by default. Transparency. When you use a trick play, you tell your teammates what's happening so that everyone knows how the move works, right? Everyone's on the same page and knows what's going on. Consent. Before you use another team's play or you use a teammate's special move, you ask first. And if they say no, you respect that. Okay. So you don't take other people's ideas. Or like one thing that I noticed my son was doing was copying and pasting images from Google Images. You don't take stuff without asking first. And if somebody says no, you respect that. When it comes to participation, you don't just watch from the sidelines while the league decides everything. You get on the field, you practice, you help to design new plays so that the game is fair and so that it's fun. So you practice, you're part of it. You're not just on the receiving end. And when your team makes rules about how to play together, when the season goes on, you check on those rules. You change them if they're needed. You adjust your strategy so that your team gets stronger. And that's how you interact with AI and ChatGPT as well. And so talking to them in that way, thanks to AI for helping me figure out how to say it in a way that made sense for them. But it also just helped to me better understand as well, like how am I using it own way that I can stay intentional and transparent too. All right. So I want to wrap up before I turn it over to Court to talk about something really exciting at Galaxy Digital. I want to talk a little bit about some of the emerging trends in professional development that I have been seeing and that I think we're going to see a lot more of as we moved into 2026. 2025 was a year of a lot of disruption in the not-for-profit sector, a year of uncertain funding getting pulled, funding coming back, funding getting pulled again. And I started to see a lot of things similar to what I saw in 2020 and a little bit different, knowing that some of these other things are happening around AI, and the year of sustainable volunteering coming up as well. One of the things that I'm seeing in terms of professional development, you may be experiencing this or you may be curious about some of these things, are an increase on the focus of credentialing. So we see a lot of people getting that we saw an increase this year in the number of people getting their CVA, in the number of people going for their CNP, Certified Nonprofit Professional, or their CFRE designations. So we're seeing a lot of individuals saying that I'm in this career, I'm in this profession. What are some of the credentials that I can get to support me in that? We saw a lot of individuals in our profession go out and volunteer, right? Using some of the found time that they had, whether their work is sponsoring that time or not, and going out and volunteering in their community. And using volunteering as a way to inform professional development as well. There was a huge increase in virtual learning. Just today only, I got some emails from folks saying, oh, I'm going to watch the replay. There's another webinar that's happening. There's so much virtual learning that's happening. And really the only challenge for us is what are we going to consume, right? What is going to be the most valuable for us? Please take advantage of what is out there, especially those free tools like these Galaxy Digital webinars as well. There has been an increase in podcasters and podcasting, the number of leaders of volunteers taking to the airwaves to podcast to share ideas and create conversations. And then there's been a huge increase in what I call the side hustle or consulting, right? So volunteer engagement professionals going out on their own and wanting to lend their expertise. all of these emerging trends in professional development are really encouraging. They show that we value our expertise, that we want to share it. And they're also encouraging because it means that learning doesn't have to happen in ways that are expensive or in ways that are institutionalized, right? Learning can be really individualized, and can be things that we choose for ourselves. All right, so Court, I'm going to pass it on to you to talk about a really special offer by Galaxy Digital. Go ahead, Court.
Yeah, so thanks, Faiza. I think that one of the things that we've seen in the last, especially, since 2019, is that people have really escalated in the types of conversations that they're having surrounding technology when it comes to being a volunteer engagement professional. People are having much more robust conversations around technology and really moving away from conversations like, I just need a tool to track hours or I just need a tool for sign up. People are really moving into this like deeper systems evaluation of technology and how does technology support my process and my systems and the way in which I, help my volunteers move through their life cycle with our organization. And so one of the things that we've done here at Get Connected by Galaxy Digital is that we have actually activated a team of volunteer technology advisors who offer a number of different tools. We have some self-assessments that we offer for folks to be able to look at their technology systems within their volunteer programming. And we also offer our tech advisors to do complimentary volunteer technology audits. And those are so incredible. It literally takes you 5 minutes to get started. The volunteer tech advisor will go and take a look at your system through whatever lens you're trying to look at it through. So saying, maybe recruitment is like your number one challenge and you want to work on your sign up, they will go through that lens and look at it through the eyes of a volunteer and the volunteer experience. And they'll give you 3 actionable takeaways and a customized video that you can use and apply immediately to improve your volunteer process. So, yeah, thank you, Annalise. Annalise is dropping some of our technology resources. But again, that trend of people really looking into systems thinking when it comes to technology and how that's fully integrated into your full volunteer life cycle and your volunteer engagement planning, and that technology is really more of a strategic tool for your holistic program versus just something to take care of 1 or 2 tasks. It's really become a lot more robust. And so we do offer, you can talk to one of our like 5 or 6 volunteer technology advisors on our team, and it's no obligation. It's a totally complimentary service that we offer because we recognize that programs are very diverse. And the way in which you engage volunteers is really nuanced. And there isn't a one size fits all, which is why we have, an entire suite of technology solutions. And so we want to make sure that we're giving folks, the best possible feedback and really talking about those systems level decisions when it comes to technology, because what you may not realize, and sometimes, and this happened to me over the course of my 2 decades in nonprofits, is that I would get one thing to take care of one thing, and then 6 months later, it was actually I had fully outgrown it and it wasn't doing enough, and that certain things had either gone deeper or they had scaled bigger, and I needed something more nuanced. So, would love to support anyone with that, and we could probably squeeze in a few of those before the end of the year as well. So, I hope that's helpful. And I do notice that there's just a big trend for volunteer engagement professionals moving away from features-based conversation around technology of taking care of 1 or 2 tasks to more holistic, systemic kind of how do I integrate, everything that I'm doing, my communications, my engagement, my volunteer sign up, my, requirements or qualification or vetting. How do I integrate that into a system that works really well? So thanks for giving me a chance to chat about that.
Court, can you just tell really quickly that story about one of the tech audits and how it took you to how the person didn't realize it took
Oh,
them to a 404 page, and then I'll share a quick story too.
Yeah, absolutely. That's one of the things, because if you're really if you're really into your volunteerism department, you may not know that something happened with the web developer at your organization because like I don't necessarily check the website where I'm working every single day, but yeah, we did a tech audit for someone and clicked on the volunteer button and it was just like a 404 not found page. And so it was like, hard to have to tell the volunteer leader like, hey, like this is why your recruitment efforts aren't working. There's nowhere you're directing everyone to a URL that has a dead end right now. And that happens more often than you might realize. So it's helpful just to get that kind of fresh set of eyes. You are not alone if that has ever happened to you, just so you know. So yeah.
Yeah. When Court and I were talking about this for the webinar today, I shared with her, there are all these processes and systems like plugins on your website that update things that are happening in the background that you don't know are happening. And so you may have been part of the web page creation and development, the massive project that your organization undertook. But things are always happening and updating. And as Court was telling me this story, I was like, you'll never believe what happened. A whole bunch of emails through our forum on our CCVA website are getting blocked because of a web, plugin that was updated. So you have to be constantly looking at these things, and the tech audit can be a really useful tool. So thanks to Galaxy Digital for that. So we're at the top of the hour. And I wanted to say thank you to everyone for being here. I have one more mentee request for you. I would love you. First, I want to say thank you for ending my 2025 with me. This is my last week of work, and you're my last meeting and my last engagement. I have a bunch of admin stuff to do, but I really loved sharing and closing out my 2025 with all of you. I want you to, if you wouldn't mind, can we share with each other one word that we can use to guide our 2026 volunteer engagement practice moving forward? Let's share what's important for us and for each other. Um, and I want us to really remember we're not alone. We have this incredible community of leaders of volunteers in our profession. Thank you to Galaxy Digital for bringing us together once again. Please be on the lookout for an amazing session in January with Galaxy Digital that Court will tell you a little bit more about. Um, I'll give you a couple more seconds to populate our screen. I love that intentional is the biggest word up there, followed by communicate and inclusive. I wish you all a happy 2026. And Court, I'll turn it back over to you to say goodbye.
Yeah, we're at the top of the hour, and I want to say thank you so much to everyone for being here with us today. Thank you to Faiza for really closing out 2025 and our full season of innovative approaches to volunteer leadership webinar series for the full year. So incredibly grateful to everyone for your presence, your contributions, and really keeping this a space for just an incredible, rich, and deep space of conversation for volunteer engagement professionals. And we are looking forward to continuing that into 2026. And we're going to kick off January with Nicole R. Smith. And Nicole is going to be talking to us about growing your volunteer engagement career and why professional development and networking are vital, and some really actionable takeaways on how to plan your 2026 to make space for that intentionally. And so that's why we're excited to have that at the beginning of the year. And thank you so much to everyone. We are going to follow up with you and get you all the resources that Faiza shared. And really can't wait to see you here again in the new year. So thank you so much for being with us.
Bye, everybody.
Thank you, Faiza. Thank you, everyone. We'll see you soon. Bye.